Prime Minister is set to announce the next stage of lifting restrictions in England. It's expected many will remain in place after June the 21st. This is Downing Street, where Boris Johnson is due to speak any minute. We'll bring you that press conference as soon as it starts. The hopes of the hospitality industry are likely to be dashed, with many businesses warning they won't survive an extension to the restrictions. It's a race between the vaccine and the variant as the government rushes to get as many adults double jabbed as possible. June the 21st was supposed to be the day that the current form of lockdown would be lifted in England. We'll find out in a few minutes what the government has decided. Also tonight, is disappointment for the Tartan Army after a 23-year wait to watch their team at a major tournament.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Denmark's players share a smile and a laugh with Christian Eriksen. The midfielder's recovering in hospital after suffering a cardiac arrest in their opening Euro 2020 game.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. In the next few minutes, the Prime Minister is due to speak about the next stage of easing restrictions in England. We'll bring you his announcement live from Downing Street as soon as it starts. It's thought the current rules are likely to remain in place for another 4 weeks from June the 21st. That was the day when all restrictions are due to be lifted. What's changed is the rise in cases thanks to the Delta variant that was first identified in India. And while we're waiting for the Prime Minister, let's go to Westminster now. We can speak to our political editor, Laura Koonsberg. Laura, this is a very difficult decision for the Prime Minister, balancing public safety versus the increasing clamour from business.
That's right, Fiona. It's a real dilemma, and this is a decision that the Prime Minister will have been very, very reluctant to take. You know, the roadmap has its own. The government's plan was always designed to lift one set of restrictions, then give it a period of time to see what happened with the disease before then lifting another set of restrictions, then having another pause to see whether or not cases started to creep up again. But since the last set of restrictions were rolled back, we all know what has happened. Cases have been starting to accelerate again quite quickly, even though the numbers are still small, with the emergence of that new Delta variant that emerged first of all in India. An increasing concern in the last couple of weeks about how the disease may be taking off again has led, we understand, to Downing Street making a decision that there will be a pause of some description, probably something around the area of 4 weeks. Of course, remember, we are in a very different situation now to those previous moments like this when the Prime Minister has come to the public with something that's going to be hard to hear. Of course, tens of millions of people have now been vaccinated. Nearly everybody who's particularly vulnerable has had the jab. But we understand what the government is expected to announce any minute now is to give more time to get the vaccine going and to protect more people. And Boris Johnson has just walked onto the podium. Let's listen in to number 10.
Thanks for joining us. When we set out on our roadmap to freedom a few months ago, we were determined to make progress that was cautious but irreversible. And step by step, thanks to the enormous efforts of the British people and the spectacular vaccine rollout, we now have one of the most open economies and societies in Europe. And as we've always known, and as the February roadmap explicitly predicted, this opening up over the last 3 steps has inevitably been accompanied by more infection and more hospitalisation, because we must be clear that we cannot simply eliminate COVID. We must learn to live with it. And with every day that goes by, we're better protected by the vaccines and we're better able to live with the disease. Vaccination greatly reduces transmission, and 2 doses provide a very high degree of protection against serious illness and death. But there are still millions of younger adults who have not been vaccinated, and sadly, a proportion of the elderly and vulnerable may still succumb even if they have had 2 jabs. And that's why we're so concerned by the Delta variant that is now spreading faster than the 3rd wave that was predicted in the February roadmap. We're seeing cases growing by about 64% per week, and in the worst affected areas, it's doubling every week. And the average number of people being admitted to hospital in England has increased by 50% week on week and by 61% in the northwest, which may be the shape of things to come, because we know the remorseless logic of exponential growth. And even if the link between infection and hospitalization has been weakened, it hasn't been severed. And even if the link between hospitalization and death has also been weakened, I'm afraid numbers in intensive care, in ICU, are also rising. And so we've obviously faced a very difficult choice. We can simply keep going with all of step 4 on June the 21st, even though there is a real possibility that the virus will outrun the vaccines and that thousands more deaths would ensue that could otherwise have been avoided. Or else, we can give the NHS a few more crucial weeks to get those remaining jabs into the arms of those who need them. And since today, I cannot say that we have met all our 4 tests for proceeding with step 4 on June the 21st, I think it is sensible to wait just a little longer. By Monday the 19th of July, we will aim to have double jabbed around 2/3 of the adult population, including everyone over 50, all the vulnerable, all frontline health and care workers, and everyone over 40 who received their first dose by mid-May. And to do this, we will now accelerate the second jabs for those over 40, just as we did for the vulnerable groups, so they get the maximum protection as fast as possible. And we will bring forward our target to give every adult in this country a first dose by the 19th of July. That is, including young people over the age of 18, with 23 and 24-year-olds invited to book jabs from tomorrow, so we reduce the risk of transmission among the groups that mix the most. And to give the NHS that extra time, we will hold off step 4 openings until July the 29th, except for weddings that can still go ahead with more than 30 guests, provided social distancing remains in place, and the same will apply to wakes. And we will continue to pilot events such as Euro 2020 and some theatrical performances. We will monitor the position every day, and if, after 2 weeks, we have concluded that the risk has diminished, then we reserve the possibility of proceeding to step 4 and a full opening sooner. As things stand, and on the evidence that I can see right now, I'm confident that we will not need more than 4 weeks, and we won't need to go beyond July the 19th. It's unmistakably clear the vaccines are working, and the sheer scale of the vaccine rollout has made our position incomparably better than in previous waves. But now is the time to ease off the accelerator, because by being cautious now, we have the chance in the next 4 weeks to save many thousands of lives by vaccinating millions more people. And once the adults of this company have been overwhelmingly vaccinated, which is what we can achieve in a short space of time, we will be in a far stronger position to keep hospitalizations down, to live with this disease, and to complete our cautious but irreversible roadmap to freedom. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Chris to do the slides.
Thank you, Prime Minister. First slide, please. So the slides are arranged around the 4 tests which Minister set at the beginning of the roadmap. The first test is that the vaccine deployment programme continues successfully. And I think everybody in the country knows that both first vaccinations and increasingly rapidly second vaccinations are progressing very effectively thanks to the work of the NHS, volunteers and many others. So this test has been met and we expect the rates to continue to be good as the Prime Minister has laid out. Next slide, please. The second test was that evidence shows the vaccines are sufficiently effective in reducing hospitalizations and deaths in those vaccinated. And we already have shown data that showed that for previous variants, this was true. We now have data, and some more has been released by Public Health England today, which shows data around the new Delta variant. Now, what has been talked about in the press, for people who've got symptomatic disease or could get symptomatic disease, one dose of the vaccine does provide some protection, but you do need 2 doses of the vaccine to provide a strong degree of protection. But once you have 2 doses, there is somewhere between a 76 and 84% reduction in symptomatic disease. Next slide, please. The news is even better for the protection that these vaccines provide for people against severe disease. And in terms of hospitalizations, the data so far, real life data from here in the UK, show that there is a very good reduction in hospitalizations from the new Delta variant after both 1 and 2 doses of the vaccines. So after 1 dose, between a 57 and 85% reduction, and after 2 doses, somewhere between 85 and 98% reduction in hospitalisation. So not complete protection, but very substantial protection after these. Again, it reinforces the absolute need to get the second dose of the vaccine. So in terms of is this dose effective, the data there are very encouraging indeed. Next slide, please. And if you see the effect of this on people being hospitalised, whereas in the previous waves we had here in the UK, the great majority of those hospitalised were older, over 65 citizens, although there were significant numbers of people under 65, I think something sometimes not appreciated, and that's on the left. What we now have is that the majority of those going into hospital are now from younger groups, under 65, partly because this is the group in which this is spreading, and it always starts off spreading in the youngest groups, but largely we think because the vaccines are providing a lot of protection now for older citizens. But it is not complete, and as you can see, even in those over 65 in which double vaccination is already in place, there are still some hospitalizations, but the ratios have completely reversed. Next slide, please. The third test is that infection rates do not risk a surge in hospitalizations, which would put unsustainable pressure on the NHS. And the rates of hospitalizations at the moment are low in all parts of the country, but, and this is the important but on this test, what we are seeing is a rapid rise, particularly marked where it was first really started in the northwest of the country, but the rest of the country is following. So there has been a 64% increase since last week, and in terms of the northwest, and you can see that in the dark blue colour here, and a 64% increase in England, and that rate will follow, we think, where the northwest has led. Now, these numbers are still relatively small, and if you're doubling from 50 to 100, 100 to 200, the numbers are still relatively modest compared to the capacity of the NHS. But several doubling times, relatively small number of doubling times, and you start getting to really quite large numbers. If you're doubling up from 1,000 to 2,000 or 2,000 to 4,000 over less than 2 weeks, clearly things can take off very rapidly. Next slide, please. And although the dark colours here on this map are where the rates of increase are greatest, but anywhere that is shaded in yellow or orange colours or dark brown, rates are increasing. Where they're in green, rates are decreasing. And you can see in this map that the increase in the new variant is occurring across the whole country. Next slide, please. The key question is, what does this do to hospitalizations? And as has been said repeatedly and rightly, the link between people getting an infection and being hospitalized has been substantially weakened. A much smaller proportion of those infected are going into hospital, but it has not been completely stopped. And what you can see here is that in terms of hospitalizations, Again, there has been a 61% increase in hospitalisations since last week in the northwest and a 50% increase across the country as a whole, but we expect that will probably accelerate. So there is the hospitalisations are following, but with a delay, the number of cases. So although we do not think an immediate overwhelming of the NHS is likely, if this continues on an exponential path, and in particular, if that then accelerated further due to further loosenings, then we would run into trouble in a relatively small number of doubling times. Next slide, please. So the final test, and really this has been led up to by the things that have happened previously, is has our assessment of the risks been fundamentally changed by new variants of concern? And what this slide shows is in the orange is the numbers of cases of the B117 alpha variant that had been the one that dominated in the UK until very recently. And that has continued on a downward path, and although it's probably stabilised a bit in the last couple of weeks, nevertheless, if this was the variant we were primarily dealing with, I think it is very likely that ministers would want to continue on the current path. The problem we have is in the dark blue, what you can see is the Delta variant, the new variant, and that is, whilst the B117 alpha is going down, the Delta variant is going up and currently going up exponentially. And just to make a point, the area in the grey shaded areas, the data are not complete. Those will carry on going up as data come in over the next weeks. So this is the reason why the assessment of risk has fundamentally shifted. At the end of the period that the Prime Minister was talking about, we will have a situation where a much higher proportion of people have been double vaccinated or vaccinated. We're coming up to the school holidays. We all want to stress that at that stage, rates will be higher than they are at the moment. But the next 4 weeks will reduce significantly the risk of a very high peak, which could cause significant problems in terms of pressure on the NHS and all the knock-on effects of that and direct deaths from COVID. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chris. Patrick, anything to add to that at this stage? OK, fine. Thank you. Let's go to members of the public for their questions. Andrew in Worthing.
Hello. Well, it was recently reported that over 25s can now get the first dose of their vaccine, which means that 12 weeks from now, plus 2 weeks for the vaccine to kick in, that'll take them to early September when they're fully vaccinated. So my question is, do you have any plans to prioritise university students so that they too are fully vaccinated by the time they go off to uni?
Thanks very much, Andrew. Well, actually, what we're saying today is I think that 23 and 24-year-olds will be able to come forward and get their vaccine doses as of today or tomorrow. So we're going as fast as we can, and by July the 19th, 2/3 of adults aged, all adults in the country will have had 2 doses by the end of so by July the 19th, we will have all adults, everybody over 18 will have had a first dose. You're perfectly right, Andrew, that there will still be some time to run before university students who get vaccinated in July will get their second dose. But we will certainly look at what we can do to accelerate second doses, as we're doing now for people across the country. And if there are outbreaks in particular places, as we've done surge vaccination and surge testing, we may do that in those places as it may be necessary. But I wonder whether Patrick or Chris, you want to add anything to that?
Well, one thing I would add, PM, is just to remind people that the system in the UK has prioritised in strict order those who are at highest risk, all the way down the ratings, and for the great majority of people of university age, other than those with pre-existing health conditions, fortunately, they're at much lower risk than older ages. So we've gone down in age ranges, and that's the reason for the ordering. But as the Prime Minister says, we would expect that everybody of university age would have had at least one dose of vaccination by the start of next term.
Thanks, Andrew. Tessa in Bedfordshire.
Why can't testing and vaccination status be used to open up weddings in the same way as it's being used to open up football matches? As a twice postponed bride-to-be, it feels like weddings are bottom of the priority list, despite being significant life events without which some people cannot progress with their lives.
Well, Tessa, I'm very, very sorry to hear about your wedding plans being postponed twice. And indeed, I'm sorry for all the disappointment that's going to be caused by going a bit slower as we are today. What we are saying, Tessa, I don't know if this is of any practical consolation to you, and I really hope it is, but we're saying that weddings can go ahead with more than 30 people. We're lifting that restriction on 30 people from June the 21st, providing social distancing is observed. I hope that works for you, Tessa, and obviously I think everybody will want to wish you every possible good fortune with your wedding. But all I can say is I'm sorry for the disappointment that this will certainly bring to weddings, to many businesses. But it's a few weeks that I think is worth it to get those jabs in. Laura Koonsberg of the BBC.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. After this 4-week delay, do you expect life to return to something that looks like normal? So people returning to the office, taking off face masks and ending the 1 metre rule? And can you rule out extending this delay any further? And could I ask Professor Whitty or Sir Patrick, when do you expect all adults to have had both jabs? And after that, would you start vaccinating children? I know there's been a study into whether or not that's a good idea.
Yeah, thanks very much, Laura. I think that is the crucial question. What is the world going to look like on July the 19th? And I think I'd give it this answer, that at a certain stage we're going to have to learn to live with the virus and to manage it as best we can. And what we're trying to do now by this delay is to reduce the current surge, and we think we can do that, and we think that a 2-week delay would make a substantial difference, and a 4-week delay we think would make even more of a difference in reducing the overall number of deaths, and that's why we're doing it. And at the end of that period by July the 19th, we do think that we will have built up a very considerable wall of immunity around the whole of the population. And at that stage, Laura, on the basis of the evidence that I can see now, I'm confident that we will be able to go forward with the full step 4, the full opening. That, of course, doesn't exclude the possibility, I'm afraid, and we've got to be honest about this, the possibility that there is some new variant that is far more dangerous, that kills people in a way that we currently cannot foresee or understand. That's obviously the case. But looking at the data now, looking at the effectiveness of the vaccines against all variants, I think that we will be able to deliver step 4 on July the 19th. Now, at that stage, people may want to keep maintaining social distancing. They may want to keep being sensible, but as far as I can see, we will be in a much better position as a country to go forward with the full opening ups that we envisage. But I mean, Chris and Patrick.
Well, on the vaccines, I mean, if you take the week of the 19th of July, all over 18s will be vaccinated or been offered the vaccine, then 8 to 12 weeks later, then everybody should have been vaccinated in that age group, so double vaccinated. So that's the sort of time scale, and it's worth really reiterating that these vaccines are really highly effective against the Delta variant. So one of the concerns that we might have had at the beginning was they weren't going to work as well. Well, first dose, not quite so much, but 2 doses is very effective. And by getting to both more people over the age of 40 double vaccinated, which protects those most likely to end up in hospital or get seriously ill, and giving all over 18s 1 dose, that will reduce spread. because the single dose will put up another barrier to spread amongst the age group most likely to spread because they have more social contact. So I think that's a sort of double protection that should be in place over the next few weeks.
And then on the question specifically on children, I think, as we've said several times before, the key thing with children is safety. We know that the risks in terms of physical disease to children, other than some children with significant pre-existing problems of physical health, are much, much lower than for adults. So you wouldn't want to vaccinate unless a vaccine was very safe, and vaccines are now being licensed in some countries, and we're accruing safety data on the safety of these vaccines in children. And there are two possible reasons you would want to vaccinate children potentially, but with caution, and this is the point I'm trying to stress. The first would be those groups who actually are at high risk of COVID, and I think JCVI will be bringing forward advice on this about which are the groups they think are at particularly high risk of COVID, and those children specifically should be vaccinated to reduce the risk of them having severe disease and, in very, very, very small number of cases, but does happen, mortality. But the wider question is around also the effect on children's particularly education, and is the multiple disruptions that might happen going to have a very negative impact on their life chances, including the effect it will have on long-term risk of physical and mental ill health. And this is going to be a decision that will have to be based on the data we have available. But at the moment, the big priority, as the Prime Minister has said, is getting through all the adults down to 18, making sure they're vaccinated and then double vaccinated.
Thanks very much, Laura. Carl Dinnan, ITV News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Some of the support that you currently have in place for businesses starts to reduce during this 4-week delay. Why aren't you keeping support and protections in place at the level that they're at now? And if I could, for Professor Whitty, if we don't have this delay in the easing of restrictions, what does your modelling tell you could happen to hospitalisations? What's the worst that could happen to the NHS?
Thanks very much, Carl. Well, look, the crucial thing about what we're agreeing to do today is to keep going with the openings that we've got in place. So we're not going backwards. I don't think any of the scientists have actually called for a reversal, and that's very important. It means that the businesses that are currently open and trading can continue to do that. We're giving, as you know, all the support measures that have been put in place are intended to last through to September. In terms of business rates, local authorities do have an extra £1 billion to cover those who need it. But I think the most important thing I can say to those businesses who are being asked to wait another 4 weeks, or maybe as little as 2 weeks, but let's be realistic, probably more likely 4 weeks. I am confident that we'll get there, and there's a difference between the June the 21st date and the July the 19th date, at least in this sense. The June the 21st date was always a not before date. I do think that looking at all the, in other words, we weren't going to take that step before June the 21st. But looking at the data that I can see now, looking at the scale of the vaccine rollout, I'm pretty confident that July the 19th will be, as it were, a terminus date, and that we'll be able to take things forward from there. Sorry, Chris. No.
The question in terms of, you addressed it to me, the question really on the modelling will be to Patrick, but I will just do a preamble on that to make 2 points. One of which is that whatever rate of increase we're seeing now and would see over the next few weeks would be significantly increased if we took the next step, because it means a lot of mixing of households that are unrelated indoors. That fundamentally is what the next step is about. So whatever rate it is will go faster if, and potentially quite significantly faster, were the next step taken over this period. And the second thing is to reiterate, just to make sure everyone is aware that we all agree on this, and not just on this panel, but across the whole of people who've looked at this, is no one thinks at the end of the 4-week delay, the risk is gone. There will still be substantial numbers, there will be substantial numbers in hospitals, and sadly there will be some people who will go on to die of this. The question is a matter of balance. What are the things which is in a sense reasonable to do to eliminate avoidable mortality and overwhelming of hospitals over the short term, where if people died, it's not just a death delayed, it's a death completely averted. And what are the things where actually at a certain point you say probably we've done most of the things that we reasonably can, given that we will have to live with this virus, which will continue to cause severe infections and kill people for the rest of our lives. Where does the balance lie?
Yes,
Patrick.
Well, so as Chris said, this is a virus that's going to be with us forever. If you look back and look at the increases we're seeing now in hospitalisations, in people on ventilators, if we didn't have the vaccination we've got, we would be looking at a question of, is more lockdown needed? That's not where we are. We're at a position now where we're in a race against the virus and the vaccines need to get ahead of it. And if you're in a race with somebody, you don't suddenly assist them in putting the afterburners on so they can outpace you. And so that's really what we need to do, is to make sure we get the vaccines in. And as Chris said, the 4-week delay should reduce the peak, whatever it would be, by something between 30 and 50%. So that's the sort of gain you get from the 4 weeks. And actually, it's not very obvious that you get much more gain from going on longer than that at the moment. So it looks like quite a good length of time. You get the 3 advantages: over 18 single dose, many more people double dosed, and close to the school holidays, with the effect that that has to also take the pressure off. And that should, between them, significantly reduce the peak. But there will be an increase in numbers and there will be an increase in hospitalisations, because that's what happens when there's more mixing.
Thanks very much. Tom Harwood, GB News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We've heard a lot about how we want this roadmap to be completely irreversible, and that after 4 weeks, hopefully, all those restrictions are gone and don't come back. But we also know that in the winter, in the late autumn, these diseases can spring up again pretty naturally. They can get pretty nasty. The Health Secretary has previously spoken about a plan for booster jabs in the autumn. And I was wondering, when are we going to get to see that plan? When can the media and the scientific community helpfully scrutinise and help out with that plan? And when will those jabs be going into people's arms in the autumn to avoid these restrictions ever coming back again? And then just one extra question to the scientists, given that we know that this sort of nasty variant is spreading much more pervasively among young people, are we considering at all opening up again that excellent Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine to the under 40s?
That's an excellent question. I'll leave Chris and Patrick to deal with. But on the irreversibility of the roadmap, and you're quite right, Tom. Of course, I mean, we're seeing a surge now, as I said earlier on. We're seeing more hospitalisations. We're seeing continued deaths, although the numbers are very, very greatly reduced. And we must be realistic, as we said at the beginning of the roadmap and throughout, that people very sadly will continue to lose their lives to this disease. So we will have a booster programme for vaccines, and we'll be sending that out very soon, and you can expect the Health Secretary to set out how and when we'll be doing that, and which groups will be coming forward first. And we'll obviously the JCVI will be studying that and producing a timetable. But the objective is, as I've said, to be irreversible, to avoid more lockdowns of the kind that we've seen. And as things stand, I can't see a reason to do that. Though there will, as everybody has said, be further surges of the disease. Do you want to go on Astra for under 40s? Astra for under 40s.
Yeah, I'll make a comment, and then Chris will want to build on it. I mean, the balance is always the risk benefit in any drug or vaccine, and obviously the benefit is greater in this particular case the higher the level of virus. So the risk-benefit changes all the time, depending on where you are. And these are decisions that are rightly ones for JCVI to look at where the risk-benefit falls at any point in the pandemic. And I think at the moment, the plan is to get all of the 18s and over vaccinated single dose with other vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna. And that's the target for the week of July the 19th. Chris, do you want to add to that?
No, and the only point to make, which is
well, we're leaving the Downing Street press conference. If you want to continue watching it, there is full coverage over on the BBC News channel. So, the Prime Minister has just confirmed that all social restrictions in England will not come to an end on June the 21st, as had been hoped. Instead, restrictions will stay until July the 19th, with a review in 2 weeks' time. The limit of 30 on numbers at weddings and funerals will be lifted, and people in care homes will no longer have to self-isolate for 14 days if they visit outside the care home. There will be a vote on these England-only measures in the House of Commons on Wednesday. All areas of Scotland are due to move to level 0 COVID restrictions on the 28th of June, meaning bigger groups can gather in cafes, pubs and restaurants, though they'll still have to observe social distancing. Limits on indoor gatherings in Northern Ireland are scheduled to be relaxed on the 21st, when the current rules in Wales will also be reviewed. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
Just relax your arms as much as you can for me.
Can they keep up?
Right, sharp scratch, okay.
Not quite right now. Even tens of millions of syringes can't hold back this surge. Ministers' reluctant conclusions pause the lifting of the remaining limits on our lives.
When we set out on our roadmap to freedom a few months ago, we were determined to make progress that was cautious but irreversible. We can give the NHS a few more crucial weeks to get those remaining jabs into the arms of those who need them. And since today, I cannot say that we have met all our 4 tests for proceeding with step 4 on June the 21st. I think it is sensible to wait just a little longer.
This is a slowdown, not a reverse. Some specific limits will even relax a little. It'll be easier for care home residents to make visits, for example. But the disease is accelerating fast. With another 4 weeks, the hope is that 2/3 of adults will have been offered both jabs.
I think if we made the decision and opened everything up now, we would be facing a particularly challenging period, probably towards the end of June, early July.
So the show can't yet fully go on. With some rules staying in place, businesses that rely on packing in punters are under pressure. The audience for the musical Amelie in London's West End should be 600 every night. But with distancing, it's less than 1/3 of that. This delay puts pressure on so many businesses and so many incomes.
We can't tread water forever. We have to open up as soon as we're able to. The goalpost move, I think, maybe for good reason, but without support, we risk undoing all of the good work that's been done so far in trying to get the sector back up and running.
But the opposition claims if the government had acted earlier to limit travel, this might not be happening at all.
This virus is surging because Boris Johnson left the back door open and allowed the variant to wash up on our shores. He was complacent, he dithered, and he didn't take action until it was too late.
There will, though, be some very happy couples in England tonight. Wedding guest lists can once again be as long as you like. So Rick and Sophia's 140 guests will be able to witness them as bride and groom a week today, as long as they put social distancing in place.
Really? Oh my God, that's amazing.
That's incredible.
That's so good.
I was not expecting
No,
that
I was not
today.
expecting that at all. Wow. Oh God, yeah.
After this 4-week delay, do you expect life to return to something that looks like normal? So people returning to the office, taking off face masks and ending the 1 metre rule? And can you rule out extending this delay any further?
At a certain stage, we're going to have to learn to live with the virus and to manage it as best we can. And what we're trying to do now by this delay is to reduce the current surge, and we think we can do that, and we think that a 2-week delay would make a substantial difference, and a 4-week delay we think would make even more of a difference.
Resistance to the delay is noisy. The government has to get MPs on side in a vote on Wednesday. But with the virus spreading, it's not likely.
that protesters or Parliament will drown out Downing Street's plan.
That report from our political editor Laura Koonsberg, and we'll be hearing from her a little bit later in the programme. So it was all going so well with the vaccination programme and the cases falling, but the rapid rise of the Delta variant, first identified in India, has changed all the previous calculations and led to this new delay. Scientists have calculated that keeping most restrictions for another 4 weeks could reduce hospital admissions by up to a half. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh has been examining the data.
It is the rise of the more infectious Delta variant that has led to the pause button being hit on unlocking. Scientists modelling the epidemic had warned ministers that a final lifting of all restrictions next week would lead to a large resurgence in cases and hospital admissions, though just how big a wave is unclear. They suggest a 4-week delay in unlocking would reduce the peak in hospital admissions by a third to a half, as more people will be vaccinated.
The next 4 weeks will reduce significantly the risk of a very high peak, which could cause significant problems in terms of pressure on the NHS and all the knock-on effects of that and direct deaths from COVID.
The hope is the increase in cases will start to fade in coming weeks because so many people have been vaccinated. Most people getting infected with Delta have not been immunised, and they're tending to be younger and recovering quicker. So what will COVID vaccination coverage look like by the middle of next month? Just over 2 million adults a week in the UK are receiving their second dose of COVID vaccine, mostly those in their 40s and 50s. A 4-week delay would allow an extra 10 million adults to be fully immunised compared to today. That's around 3/4 of the adult population, though maximum protection doesn't kick in until around 2 weeks after that second shot. Just over 1 million adults a week are receiving their first dose of vaccine, mostly those in their 20s. Now, if vaccine supply remains steady, then by the 19th of July, around 9 in 10 adults in the UK will have received at least one dose of COVID vaccine. And remember, there's a government pledge to offer all over 18s a first dose of vaccine by the end of July.
By getting to both more people over the age of 40 double vaccinated, which protects those most likely to end up in hospital or get seriously ill, and giving all over 18s one dose, that will reduce spread, because the single dose will put up another barrier to spread amongst the age group most likely to spread because they have more social contact.
And there is more good news on vaccines. Analysis by Public Health England confirms they offer high levels of protection against severe illness with the Delta variant. One dose is good, but 2 is better. So the race continues against the vaccine and the virus. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, the latest official figures for the pandemic show that in the past 24 hours, 3 deaths were reported, and there have been 7,742 new infections, which means an average of 7,439 new cases per day in the last week. Over 147,000 people received a first dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, meaning more than 41.6 million people have now had their first jab. That's 79.2% of UK adults. The number of people who've had their second dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period is over 181,000. Just under 30 million people have now had both doses, meaning 56.9% of UK adults are fully vaccinated. Well, let's talk to our medical editor, Fergus Walsh. So, Fergus, very disappointing for so many that there is now this delay in lifting restrictions, but at least we have the good news on the success of the vaccines.
Yeah, and it's striking, Fiona, just how successful vaccines are proving. Spectacularly effective. One dose, from new evidence, very good at preventing infection and, more importantly, serious illness. But 2 doses, a really, really high level of protection. Back in early December, 4 out of every 5 COVID hospital admissions were among those over 55 who are most vulnerable to COVID. Now it's down to 1 in 3. So those going into hospital tend to be younger and tend not to have been vaccinated. I got the clear sense from watching that news conference that this really is intended as a pause only, barring some terrible new variant, to give time to get more jabs in arms. It will also coincide with school holidays, and there'll be less mixing indoors. And it was notable that not just the Prime Minister, but Professor Chris Whitty said we are going to have to learn to live with COVID at some point.
Fergus, thank you very much. Well, for those in the hospitality industry, it's been a particularly anxious wait to find out whether restrictions would be easing next week. Many warned they'll go out of business altogether if restrictions weren't lifted. Our business editor, Simon Jack, has been to Birmingham to assess how today's announcement will affect people there.
The pubs are about great experiences. They're not about the liquid, and that's what's gone. The experience has been stripped out.
Experiences like this. Football in the beer garden in summer 2018 style. Full capacity now is a fraction of what it was. Don't be fooled if your local pub looks like it's doing okay, says Keith Marsden.
This extra extension in restrictions is a little bit like an iceberg. A lot of it you don't see. If you come in here on a busy weekend, you think, oh yeah, they're doing quite nicely. But beneath the surface, there's lots of problems lurking. People haven't aggressively chased debt. Landlords have let people off with rent, business rates, holidays, things like that. They're now coming to the surface. All these things will precipitate a massive amount of failures in the hospitality business.
And those icebergs start arriving at the end of this month.
This delay doesn't just prolong the loss-making agony, it's actually worse than that. At the beginning of July, government support for staff wages begins to start tapering off. Businesses will have to start paying rates again, albeit at a reduced level. And a ban on landlords evicting tenants facing big rent arrears expires. The financial emergency is not just prolonged, it's getting more acute.
And whenever the day comes to open fully, the industry will be saddled with enormous debts.
The rent debt is about 2.5 billion, government-backed loans 6 billion, and then they've been deferring payment of VAT and PAYE, so that the amount they have to pay to the Exchequer, Crown debt, that's also a significant amount. The shadow of debt will run alongside the industry for many years to come.
If we don't have financial support, I don't want to think about what the alternative is.
Nightclubs like this one in Digbeth haven't been able to open at all since last March. It had events planned from next Monday, revenue that owner David Whittle was relying on.
Now, with this new delay, we don't have any money to pay the bills from the end of June, and the sold-out events that we had booked in, that's what was going to get us through, because we would have made revenue, we would have had profit, we would have been able to pay our bills. Now we don't have anything.
Unlike the artwork, the outlook is not a pretty one. Business groups are calling for government support to be extended in line with the delay, or watch businesses already starved of income and drowning in debt finally go under.
Now, whether you are a venue like this one where we're sound checking, usually you would have a crowd of 500 people in here tonight. They're going to have a seated audience of 80, therefore it's uneconomic, losing money, or whether you haven't been able to open at all like many businesses. This is not what they wanted to hear. It was expected, but it was also dreaded. What they do want to hear is whether government support measures will be extended corresponding to the extra time before the restrictions are eased. So at the moment, the businesses are looking like this is a race against the vaccine. This is a race for economic solvency that many businesses, even with this short delay, fear they may begin to lose.
Simon Jack in Birmingham, thank you. And you can read more about all the changes and the remaining coronavirus restrictions on the BBC News website. That's bbc.co.uk/news. Well, let's look at what else has been happening today. And in football, it was heartbreak for Scotland at Hampden Park as they lost their opening match of the European Championships. The Czech Republic won 2-0 in front of almost 10,000 fans. Jane Dougal was watching the action.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder, and Scotland's been away too long. Their fans have waited a generation for this day. Inside Hampden, the anthem raised goosebumps and hopes. The crowd sounding far louder than their 10,000. Captain Andy Robertson thought he'd settled nerves with this impressive strike, the keeper getting a hand to it.
tipped over the top.
But before the Czechs were ruthless in possession,
But it could be costly because it's the Czech Republic on the break.
Schick again spotting the keeper off his line. Scotland had more chances, but just weren't clinical.
What a save.
For our first game in a very long time, it's a tough lesson for us that at the highest level in the best tournaments in the world, you know, you have to take your chances when they come to us. Czech Republic done that, we didn't, and unfortunately that's why, you know, we're on the wrong end of the result.
There is no denying the disappointment in this loss. For some, a familiar feeling. For others, a new and crushing experience. But in 4 days' time, Scotland face England and will need to up their game if they're to save national pride.
Well, sadly, Scotland has been here before. Anticipation and hope replaced with deflation after that defeat. It's not the winning start to a major tournament that Scotland might have wanted, and it's left supporters wondering what might have been. Lorna Gordon reports from a fan zone in Glasgow.
It has been a long time coming, and for Scotland's Tartan Army, there wasn't a second to waste. Some were there the last time the men's team were in a major final.
I was there 23 years ago in France, and I'm buzzing for this. All right?
Superb.
Come on, Scotland! Yes! Come on!
For others, seeing Scotland at this level, a whole new ball game. Thousands in this socially distanced fan zone, including supporters from both sides. Who are you supporting today?
Czech.
Who are you supporting?
Scotland.
At the same table?
Yeah, we're husband and wife, so we just, yeah.
And our son, who do you support?
A joy down that side.
For many Scottish school children, lessons stopped to watch the game. Teachers and parents their age the last time this came around.
It feels quite a lot to me because Scotland's not played like a proper match in ages. When I went up the stairs there making this flag, I felt so proud for Scotland.
Scotland games are always as much about the fans as the football, enjoying the journey, if not always success. Disappointed, but Scotland's loyal fans are ever optimistic and looking forward to the game with England on Friday. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Glasgow.
A review by the BBC of the appointment of Martin Bashir as the BBC's religious affairs correspondent has concluded he wasn't hired to cover up his deception in obtaining an interview with Diana, Princess of Wales, 20 years earlier, but that proper consideration wasn't given to other controversies surrounding him. Our Home Editor Mark Easton is with me. So, Mark, tell us more about what this report had to say.
You will remember there were all kinds of accusations flying around as to why Martin Bashir was rehired by the BBC. When the then Director General, Lord Hall, knew that he'd faked documents and lied to get that, the BBC's biggest ever scoop, his 1995 interview with Princess Diana. There had been suggestions that his reappointment, as you say, was to sort of contain or cover up that scandal. But today's report by the former BBC executive Ken Macquarie said that that was completely unfounded. There were shortcomings in the interview process, but he was the best person for the job among those who'd applied. And if any of those who were involved in that process had known the truth about all his lies and deception, he wouldn't have been appointed. That's what the inquiry said. And, of course, those individuals didn't know. However, the current Director General, Tim Davie, any sigh of relief that he's got may be short-lived, because tomorrow he and Lord Hall are among those being interviewed by MPs looking into the affair, and already the chair of that committee has said that he's deeply concerned by the contents of the report and that the decision to rehire Mr Bashir when there were high-level doubts over his integrity stretches incredulity to breaking point. It looks as though it's going to be another tough day for the BBC tomorrow.
Charles, Mark, thank you very much. Arlene Foster has resigned as Northern Ireland's First Minister 6 weeks after she was ousted as leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. In her farewell speech, she urged all parties at Stormont not to waste time on what she called frivolous brinkmanship. Under the power-sharing system, her departure means the Deputy First Minister, Michelle O'Neill of Sinn Féin, also automatically leaves office. The DUP and Sinn Féin have a week to agree on their successors, or the devolved government will collapse. NATO leaders have agreed China poses systemic challenges to international law and security at a summit in Brussels. In a concluding statement, NATO deemed China a security risk to the Western alliance. The summit is President Biden's first NATO meeting since taking office, and he stressed that the alliance was critically important to US security. Let's go back to our top story and the delay in lifting most of the current restrictions in England until July the 19th. Only weddings and funerals will be able to lift the limit on numbers, and people in care homes will no longer have to self-isolate for 2 weeks if they leave their care home. Well, let's hear again from our political editor, Laura Koonsberg. And Laura, this will have dashed the hopes of so many, in particularly the hospitality and entertainment industries.
It will, Fiona. I mean, it's felt inevitable for the last few days, but I think that doesn't stop the confirmation of the delay being really crushing for some businesses who've had such a rough time over the last, well, more than a year or so now, and nearly getting on for 6 months since lockdown was brought back in January. You know, the Prime Minister tried to signal very strongly that by the time we get to mid-July, that should, in his view, be it. He used the phrase a terminus date. I think that was also a strong message to those in his party who worry about extending the limits for another little while. But I think it was also clear, listening to the Prime Minister and the top medics, that they just didn't really feel that they had any choice here. They said that this decision would prevent thousands of deaths with the way that the Delta variant has been spreading. So it's obviously been a dilemma and something that has been difficult to reluctantly conclude. But it does really seem from the tone of that press conference that by this point they just really didn't feel as if they had very much choice. Remember, the announcements tonight relate only to England. We'll hear from Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland tomorrow, Mark Drakeford in Wales by the end of the week, and in Northern Ireland leaders are obviously also looking at this again. But this moment that we should have been about to be arriving at, when finally we might have been able to see the back of some of the limits on our lives, is on hold for now. And wherever you're watching in the UK, leaders are probably going to be asking all of us to be a bit more patient.
And Laura at Millbank, thank you very much. Well, let's take a look at the weather. Here's Louise Lear. Hi, Louise.
Hello, Fiona. Well, yesterday we were united, the nation, with sunshine and heat, weren't we? Today has been a bit of a divide because it's been hot in the southeast. This was Twickenham this afternoon. In fact, we've seen the highest temperature recorded so far this year. Yes, we have reached just shy of 30 degrees, but it's been a real contrast up into the northwest. Yesterday, Northern Ireland had the warmest day of their year so far with 25 degrees, but look at the difference. A good few digits down today, only 30 degrees the high, and there's been quite a lot of cloud around as well. Now, this cloud, well, it's all sinking its way steadily south through the night tonight. In fact, we did see a little more cloud developing in the London area as we went through the afternoon, but generally we keep a relatively quiet night. The wind direction coming from a northwesterly, a little bit fresher. At single figures into the far north, 7 to 9 degrees. Still a sultry night in the southeast, those temperatures taking their time to fall away. We may well start off on a grey note as well. But generally speaking, there'll be a good deal of dry, fine weather for many of us. A weather front starting to push into the far northwest once again. A southerly wind picking up with it, and there will be outbreaks of rain as we go through the day. 12 to 19 degrees the high here, but we may well see the highest values in the south once again of around 25 or 26 degrees, perhaps not quite as warm as today. That low pressure is going to bring some heavy rain across Scotland through the night, but it will weaken off considerably. So to start with, on Wednesday, it'll be a band of cloud moving across the borders into the north of England and North Wales. And this is going to mark the dividing line between slightly fresher air to the north, still 14 to 19 degrees. Still another warm, very humid day as the wind direction swings back round to a southerly. And it's this heat and humidity that could cause some issues as we move through later on Wednesday towards the end of the working week. A lot of uncertainty where those showers are going to sit, but there is a plume of thundery showers developing across Spain and France, and they're going to threaten across southeast England. Keep watching the forecast. We will, of course, update you. Fiona.
Louise, thanks very much. And that is all from the BBC News at 6. The One Show is starting now over on BBC Two and here on BBC One. We can join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good evening. Bye-bye.